Daf Yomi, Daf Yomi, Daf Yomi. Daf Yomi, Tractate, Shevuos, page 24a, top of the page, is the words Be'isur Habami Elav. Is with regard to a prohibition that occurs on its own, like the prohibition against eating on Yom Kippur, which is more inclusive than the prohibition against eating non-kosher food, and therefore takes effect. But with regard to a prohibition that occurs by the act of a person himself, meaning an oath or vow, we do not say that because it is more inclusive, it can take effect also with regard to items that are already forbidden by Torah law. Bishlam Lakish Mishum Hachi Kapata Rabbi Shimon Titania Rabbi Shimon Omer Kol Shul Makois Velo Emokizais El Korban El Rabbi Yochanan My time Rabbi Shimon Dipatal. The Gemara asks, granted, according to Reish Lakish, who understands the Mishnah to be dealing with the case of one who took an oath about less than a full measure, it is due to this reason that Rabbi Shimon deems exempt one who takes an oath prohibiting himself from eating non-kosher food, as it is taught in a Braita. Rabbi Shimon says, any amount is sufficient to render one liable to receive lashes, and the sages stated the measure of an olive bulb to determine only liability to bring an offering. According to Reish Lakish, Rabbi Shimon holds that one is already under oath from Mount Sinai, even with regard to less than a full measure, and for that reason, the oath does not take effect. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, who understands the Mishnah to be referring to an oath that includes erstwhile permitted items, erstwhile. Wow. What does that mean? Maybe before this. Maybe that's it. Before this permitted items. What is the reason Rabbi Shimon deems one exempt from bringing an offering for breaking his oath not to eat non-kosher food? Rabbi Shimon etameh, the less day is a koilel. The Gemara answers, isn't the reason that the first Tana holds that the individual is liable for violating his oath due to the fact that the oath generates a more inclusive prohibition? In this matter, Rabbi Shimon conforms to his standard line of reasoning that he does not hold that a more inclusive prohibition takes effect where a pre-existing prohibition is in place. This is in accordance with that which is taught in a Braita. Rabbi Shimon says one who eats non-kosher meat on Yom Kippur is exempt from bringing an offering for eating on Yom Kippur, despite the fact that the prohibition against eating Yom Kippur is a more inclusive prohibition than that of eating non-kosher meat, as on that day one may not eat anything. Bishlam Lakish Mashkach hazeh belav vahein ela Rabbi Yochanan bishloim elav mishkachas la elahein hechi mishkachas la. From the verse, or if anyone take an oath clearly with his lips to do evil or to do good, Leviticus 5:4, the sages derived that one is liable to bring an offering for an oath on an utterance only when the oath is such that it could be inverted from the positive to the negative or vice versa. For example, one is liable for violating an oath to eat because one can also take an oath not to eat. The Gemara asks, granted, according to the opinion of Reish Lakish, you find a case where the oath can be negative or positive. Therefore, one is liable, according to the rabbis, when he takes an oath that he will eat any amount, since he could also take an oath that he will not eat any amount. But according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, granted, you can find a case of a negative oath, as the oath not to eat non-kosher animals takes effect when it includes other permitted items. Before this, permitted items. But how can you find a positive version of this oath? An oath to eat non-kosher animals cannot take effect, as eating non-kosher animals is prohibited by Torah law, and my guess is that it's going into the rule of someone makes a condition, like counter to what is written in the Torah, then his condition is null and void. I think that's probably what they're tuning into right now. But rather, do not distinguish between the former and the latter clauses of the Mishnah based on whether he specifies what he is eating. In both cases, he takes an oath not to eat, without specifying. In the case where he eats something edible, he is exempt, in accordance with that which Rava says. As Rava says, that if one said, "On my oath, I will not eat," and he ate dirt, he is exempt, since eating an inedible substance is not considered to be eating. Eating non-kosher meat is considered to be eating. For that reason, the latter clause of the Mishnah states that one is liable for doing so if he took an oath not to eat. The oath takes effect with regard to the non-kosher items because, as Rabbi Yochanan noted, it includes items that would otherwise be permitted. Amam Rav Mari Afana Nami Tanina Konam Ishti Ne'etli Imachalti Hayom V'yachal Level Tutrefos Shkat Simur Amasim Harei Ishto Asur Lo. Rav Mari said, we learned in the Mishnah 22b as well, that eating non-kosher food is considered eating, as if one said, it is konam from my wife to derive benefit from me if I ate today. And he had eaten carcasses or treifot, repugnant creatures, or creeping animals. His wife is prohibited from deriving benefit from him. Haki hashta hasm given mika the Gemara asks, how can these cases be compared, since he initially ate the forbidden item and only then took an oath saying that he did not eat? And now we turn to 24b, Chavdalat Amud Beis, top of the page, with the words Cheshuve or Achshove Ela Hacha Mi Achshave. In taking the oath, he granted significance to the non-kosher food, and that is why his eating forbidden items is considered to be eating. But here, where he took an oath not to eat and then ate non-kosher food, did he thereby give significance to it? For this reason, no conclusive proof can be cited from the last case of the Mishnah. But my question is, since when do you have to give importance to something to consider it eating? That's like a new idea that just was brought in here. Where does it say that you have to give? If I think this is not important, I drink it. Is that not called drinking? This coffee is not important. I didn't drink it. Everyone would say that that's nonsense. So why? So I'm comparing it to here. Why is it that when you say he didn't give it importance, that he make an oath not to eat non-kosher food, he didn't give any significance to it, and it's not considered that he ate? I don't think anyone would even bother to answer this question, but these are the kinds of questions that come endlessly, all the time, very often, let's put it that way. These Gemaras, it's just lines of reasoning, lines of logic that are being thrown at you, and you have to accept them, but what was the basis of it in the first place? You know? Anyway, Vaitel, Shasam Poiskim, Amar Rava. Rava said, my time in the Mandis, Le Yisrael. And Rabbi Yochanan understands the Mishnah as referring to a case in which the oath takes effect because it is a more inclusive prohibition than the prohibition against eating non-kosher food, in that it adds additional prohibitions for the same individual. In this context, Rava says, what is the reasoning of the one who holds that a more inclusive prohibition takes effect where there already is a prohibition in place? Rava answers his own question. Rava answers his own question. It is just as it is in the case of expanded prohibition, which incorporates additional people into the list of those for whom the original item is forbidden. And expanded prohibition also takes effect despite the fact that there is already prohibition in place. And with regard to the one who exempts another from liability in the case of a more inclusive prohibition, as he does not hold that it takes effect, why does he hold that an expanded prohibition does take effect? When he says that an expanded prohibition takes effect, that is with regard to a single piece, meaning that the number of people who are prohibited from eating the same piece of meat is expanded. With regard to two distinct pieces, meaning a case where the new prohibition expands the scope of prohibited items, as in an inclusive prohibition, we do not say that it takes effect. Rava says, Leman de Isle Isul Koilel, Amar Shvua Shloich Te'enim, because of Amar Shvua Shloich Te'enim Ve'anavim, Migo, the Chayel Shvua Anavim, Chayel Venami Ateini. Rava says, according to the one who holds that a more inclusive prohibition takes effect where another prohibition is already in place, the halacha should be as follows. When a person says, on my oath, I will not eat figs, and then says, on my oath, I will not eat figs and grapes, since the last oath takes effect with regard to the grapes, it also takes effect with regard to the figs, even though they were already forbidden by his previous oath. Pshita, that's totally obvious. Why would I think otherwise? The Gemara answers, lest you say that we might say that a more inclusive prohibition takes effect only with regard to a prohibition that occurs on its own, like the prohibition against eating non-kosher food. But with regard to a prohibition that occurs by the act of a person himself, we do not say that the more inclusive prohibition takes effect. Rava teaches us that there is no difference. I mean, I would still think pshita, but okay. We have to accept this line of reasoning now. Lines of reasoning being thrown, and you have to always accept a new line of reasoning, and you really can't question it. But then again, if you're learning Talmud, sometimes you just want to accept their flow. Depends which way you want to go. Rava, the son of Rabbah, raises an objection from a Mishnah. Rava Berei de Rabbah. I wonder where you have this. Rava Berei de Rabbah. For all you Gematria fans out there, Rava Berei de Rabbah has a numerical value of 631. In Atbash, 629. In Albam, 677. That is significant. Rava Berei de Rabbah. Okay. Yesh oichem l'chila achas. Chayal le'am achatois v'oshim echad v'elohein tamish v'chelev. Oh, it says 30. Okay. Rava the son of Rava raised an objection from Mishnah in Krito 13b. It is possible for a person to perform one act of eating for which he is liable to bring 4 sin offerings and 1 guilt offering. And these are the prohibitions one can violate in this manner that would make him or her liable to bring 4 sin offerings and 1 guilt offering. What is it? What are they? A ritually impure person who ate forbidden fat that is left over of the sacrificial animals on Yom Kippur. If he did this and was unaware of the relevant prohibitions, he is liable to bring 4 sin offerings as well as a guilt offering for deriving benefit from the misuse of consecrated property. Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir Omer, Av imoy ze Shabbos lo yitzio chayav amulo eina min Hashem. Rabbi Meir says also, if it was Shabbat and he transferred the item from one domain to another in his mouth, he is liable to bring a sin offering for performing labor on Shabbat as well. The rabbi said to him, this is not a prohibition of the same type, since in the case of Rabbi Meir's additional prohibition, he is not violated by eating. V'im isa mishkachas la chamesh kegon she'amar. This is reminding us of shades of Makos again, where we're expanding the amount of lavim and whips or whatever, or chatas. We're going to how many possible sins a person can commit. V'im isa mishkachas la chamesh kegon she'amar Shevuos shelo oichel Timori v'chelev. Migo dechayel shvuah timorim chayel anam v'chelev. Rava, the son of Rava, explains the objection that arises from the Mishnah. And if it is so that a more inclusive prohibition takes effect, then you find a case where one is liable for the violation of 5 prohibitions in one act of eating, such as where one says in the aforementioned situation, on my oath I will not eat dates and forbidden fat. Since the oath takes effect with regard to the dates, it also takes effect with regard to the forbidden fat. The fact that the Mishnah fails to mention such an oath indicates that a more inclusive prohibition does not take effect where another prohibition is already in place. Ki katani israva me'ilav israva me'az katani. The Gemara answers the absence of an oath with a more inclusive prohibition in the Mishnah does not indicate anything. When the Tana teaches the scenario above, he lists only the potential prohibitions that occur on their own in one act of eating, but he does not teach prohibitions that occur by the act of the person himself. The Gemara asks, but doesn't the Mishnah include in this list prohibition against deriving benefit that from consecrated property, which does not occur on its own, but only when an item is consecrated? The Gemara answers, the case in the Mishnah is that of a firstborn animal whose sanctity is from the womb, meaning it begins automatically at birth. If you wish, say instead, in response to the question, that when the Tana of the Mishnah teaches it, he includes only matters to which presenting a request for dissolution does not apply. An oath to which a request for dissolution applies is not taught. The Gemara asks, doesn't the Mishnah include in its list the prohibition against deriving benefit from consecrated property? Consecration can be dissolved by a sage. The Gemara answers, didn't we already establish that the case in the Mishnah is that of a firstborn animal whose sanctity cannot be dissolved? If you wish, say instead that when he teaches that case, he lists only those prohibitions for which one is liable to bring a fixed sin offering. If one breaks his oath, he is liable to bring a sliding scale offering, and the Tana of the Mishnah does not teach about the liability to bring other offerings. The Gemara asks, doesn't the Mishnah list the transgression of an impure person who ate consecrated items, meaning the sacrificial animals mentioned in the Mishnah, which is a prohibition for which one brings a sliding scale offering? Benasi the Rabbi Eliezer, he de'amar nasi, maybe she so'il. The Gemara answers, the Mishnah is referring to a king or a prince who eats or president who eats the leftover of a sacrificial animal while impure. And the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says a ritually impure king who ate consecrated items brings a male goat as a sin offering rather than the sliding scale offering by a commoner. Ravashi said there's a different answer. When the Tana teaches this case, he lists only matters that apply when one eats the measure of an olive bulk, whereas the case of an oath, which applies to eating even less than the standard measure, is not taught in the Mishnah. The Gemara asks, doesn't the Mishnah include in its list the prohibition against deriving benefit from the misuse of consecrated property, which applies to eating even less than an olive bulk? The Gemara answers, we require that one derive the value of one pruta of benefit in order to be liable, so that is also a prohibition to which standard measures apply. Ravashi me'everia Amar Avizera. Wow, Ravashi me'everia. Amar Avizera ki katani zedoy kore zedoy lav lo katani. Ravashi of Averia said that Rabbi Zera said, when the Tana teaches this case, he lists only prohibitions for which intentional violation of them renders one liable to receive karet, and he does not teach prohibitions for which intentional violation of them renders one liable to receive lashes. The Gemara asks, but isn't the guilt offering for the misuse of consecrated property, which is listed in the Mishnah, a prohibition for which intentional violation of it renders one liable to receive only lashes, not karet? And nevertheless, the Tana of the Mishnah teaches it.